In this video, I'm going to discuss replication studies, and the video is partially informed by this research paper which was published in Language Learning in 2018 by Marsden and colleagues. Replication studies are important in all research fields, including language assessment and applied linguistics. So a replication study uses the same materials or procedures or relies upon the same hypotheses that an initial study has done. The importance of replication study is to test the reliability of the previous study's findings. So it's also known, because it's important, it's also known as the gold standard of research evidence, because if the results are replicable across other contexts with, for example, a different group of participants, then your research evidence is verifiable and rigorous. Whereas if it's not, then I'm afraid it's not rigorous. I suggest that you can take a look at IRIS, which stands for the Instruments for Research into Second Languages repository, which has got this website address, to see if there are some data sets and also instruments which previous researchers have used in applied linguistics. And if you want to replicate any of them, then the data sets and those instruments which have already been uploaded to the repository can actually be of great help. When it comes to replication research, some researchers and scholars have warned that there has been a crisis in the state of replication research. This crisis has been explained and shed light on in terms of three types of limitations. One of them is that there has been a small amount of published replication research across many fields, especially in language testing, and to a relatively less extent in applied linguistics. The second one is that there has been a poor quality of replication research in previous studies. And finally, some findings, even though they might sound interesting, they may not be reproducible or replicable across other contexts. As a scholar in the field of language assessment, I find that these actually make sense and hold in the field of language assessment, and certainly we will need more investigations of replication design in language assessment. The term reproducibility or replicability or replicable commonly serves two functions. The first function has to do with the repeatability of the study, and the other function has to do with the results of the study. Regarding the first one, replicability is said to refer to the extent to which it's possible to carry out the study again. In order to be able to carry out the study, there has to be sufficient information about the materials, the subjects, the hypotheses, the profile of the subjects, and a lot of other things about the study in the previous or in the initial study, so that the researchers who want to replicate that study will have no problems reparameterizing the parameters of the initial study. So you need to know sufficiently about the first one. And as a result, if you are an investigator who is doing a research study, it will be very important for you to provide all sort of information that will help that will help future researchers to replicate your investigation in different or similar contexts. The second meaning or function of reproducibility has to do with the results of a replication, and it refers to the extent to which the results of a replication study are similar to those of the initial study. It is also known as the replication of findings. And what this means exactly is, if you use the same methodology and approach, and you recruit the same sort of participants in your investigation, so that's only stage one of reproducibility. But if you cannot reproduce the same results as those in the initial study, then we can say that the results of the initial study or the hypotheses and the theories that emerge from it are reproducible. Now I'm going to propose or review with you 3 frameworks that differentiate between different kinds of reproducibility or replicability research. 2 of them come from psychology research, and 1 of them is from second language writing or applied linguistics. So let's go through the first one, which was proposed by Lykken in 1968 in a paper which was published in Psychological Bulletin. Lykken differentiated between 3 types of replication research: literal, operational, and constructive. And I'm going through these and provide examples. Literal replication has to do with using a sort of design in which you add on to the participants, or you extend the number of participants as you go ahead in your investigation. Let me give you an example to clarify what I mean by this. Let's say you have recruited 200 people in your investigation, and then you decide you want to replicate this. So you extend your study and you go beyond 200 and you include 400 or 600, for example, participants. Now, the results of this second half of your study could be presented in a separate paper or in a separate article. Lykken knows this or refers to this as literal replication because the conditions are exactly the same and everything else is kept the same. What you want to do is just to add on to the number of participants in that study. Number 2 is operational replication, which uses the same methods and conditions and applies these methods and conditions to a different context. And finally, there's a constructive replication, which doesn't really necessarily use the same methods and conditions, but what it is interested in is to look into the claimed relationships between the constructs or the variables that you have tested, but it uses different methods. For example, if you did an initial study and used a t-test, that constructive replication, which is done in the future, might use a regression analysis, or even it may use a different instrument from the instruments that you use to collect your data.